Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
you gotta be confident about your Achilles when you show up.
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris
Hearing
Dowhouse,
about Mr. Pointless in fantasy this season.
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
All right. Operation Domination back in the building, talking about the rookie running back class. It is a stocked one. We haven't had one of these in so long. I'm so excited to finally get back to getting some running back value on my Dynasty teams. As always, I'm your host, Dan Mater, joined here with Adam LaRue and Chris D. Just the three of us amigos today. We'll make up for it and that much more next week when we have Pat Fitzmaurice and Chase Thornton coming back into the building. But for now, the three amigos are going to go at it over these running backs, man. And the first things first, what is our process? We have to discuss that. What goes into it? What's most important? Adam, what is your process?
Yeah, I mean, first things first, I try to be, especially as someone who's plays more Dynasty than anything else, I try to be talent first. Now, with running backs and with this class in particular, it's a little bit hard to follow that because there's a lot of guys who are in really similar tiers who could break one way or the other just depending on landing a spot. So it's about finding a really good balance of that, of talent and landing spot, especially at running back. There's other positions, tight end, wide receiver, for example, where for me I'm very talent above all else, but running back's one where you have to find that balance. And then I think it's the things like running backs who can do the little things, running backs who have good vision, running backs who can fit into tight spaces have been really strong in the NFL for the last couple of years, just given the state of offensive line play. I think that there's also an opportunity for power backs to kind of make their way back into the meta, so to speak, just because of how much too high there's been and how much teams are focusing on stopping the passing game and the way that the game seems to be shifting to running being more impactful. So there's a good amount of things, but that's the gist, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, you covered quite a bit of it. Chris, I want to hear what's your process, what's most important to you when you're evaluating these running backs?
Well, from my just in general right now, I'm probably fantasy behind in a way where I start off with a scouting idea and I kind of look through who are the products, who are the guys who stand out with me, who are the guys if I'm looking for to build my team where I think their value is in this upcoming draft, where I kind of grade them, and then I try to go back through and kind of factor in fantasy. I know a lot of people talk about draft capital. That's probably something that I don't equate into my rankings, these rankings specifically, because I don't know where people are going to go. What I try to go off of is, do you have a skill set that's something I feel like translate across the league? Do you have ability to kind of be a game changer? Adam alluded to, what kind of role do you play in the backfield? And I kind of proceed from there. What I'm looking for ultimately is the game changers. I mean, what we want at running back is, of course, consistency is nice, but you want the guys who are special at the running back position, and we know that they can come all different ways, different sizes, in different rounds. I mean, you can find them in the first round, you can find them in the sixth round. So that's what I get excited about the running back position, where it's one of those positions that it's the opportunity. So when I'm grading running backs, I'm looking at guys who I think if they get the opportunity and do they have things to get that shot, the coaching's trust, do they have things to get on that field, and if they do, can they stay out there? So I kind of put all those things in the equation and, kind of come out with fantasy, like I said last, where I'm okay now. I'm still fine-tuning that because we're going to see fits, we're going to see positions, we're going to see playing time. That's still to be determined. But right now we're looking at skill sets in my book.
Yeah, I mean, two things you said there, absolutely. Like, projected draft capital is nice for these shows before we've had the draft to kind of get an idea of where these guys might be going. But to your point, we don't know for sure until we get the actual draft capital at the NFL draft, which is, of course, a bigger indicator than projected draft capital. The other thing you said that I agree with, was a big part of my process as well, is, opportunity. Like, of all the positions, the running back opportunity matters the most. Like, we always talk about volume is king in fantasy football, but for the running backs, that's more true than any position, essentially, when it comes to fantasy. We've seen running backs less talented be drafted later, be undrafted, who wind up being pretty good fantasy pieces for at least a time, maybe an entire year, maybe two, maybe a little bit longer, sometimes not as long as others. But because they've found themselves in a situation where they're able to produce enough and get that opportunity, of course, when we're talking about our rookie running backs, I want guys who I think can project to be 3-down backs. Even if they're not the most proficient, like maybe it's a guy who's not like the best runner, but he can do it well, but he's a great pass catcher, or vice versa, where he's a great runner, but serviceable as a pass catcher. I want guys who can do 3-down workloads because those guys present the best opportunities. And then, of course, film. And then combine. The combine is like the little cherry on top. Do I like you in the film? Do I think you can handle a 3-down workload? If you're a specialty back, what I think your specialty is. And then the combine's the little cherry on top. How high is your ceiling? How explosive can I expect you to be? Because that can also, your athleticism can also tie into how many opportunities do you need to be fantasy football productive? And we're going to have that conversation throughout this episode as well. The first guy we got to talk about, he's number one on all of our boards, and that's Ashton Jeanty. And I think this might be the only one that all three of us agree on, and everybody agrees on. So I'm not going to talk about is Ashton Jeanty number one and why. I want to talk about is the gap between Ashton Jeanty and your number two significant enough where if you're going into your rookie drafts that you may say, hey, I got a high first round pick. Do I want to trade back because I think I can still get 80, 70% of Jeanty and an extra pick, and is that worth it? What do you think about that, Adam?
I'm a Jeanty guy all the way. I mean, to me, he is, if not...
Well, hold on, Adam, hold on, slow down. For some reason, you got muted there for a second. That's.
All right, but I was gonna say, to me, he is one of the best, 2 or 3 players in this draft, if not the best player in this draft, bar none. I think Ashton Jeanty, especially, I think the best way to put it is that this is the deepest running back class we've had in a good few years, and he is still in his own tier. I think for almost everyone. It's nearly unanimous that he's the RB1, and for good reason. I think he's the athlete. I think he's got the vision. He just kind of has all of what you need. Makes the big plays, does the little things, does the complete package. And a lot of these guys are great at 2/3 of the package. And that's still awesome, compared to like last year's class, for instance, where there's like 2 guys who can do 2/3 of the things, and everyone else is like, I'm really good at one thing, and everything else is work in progress, right? That's most running back classes. This class, there's a lot of guys who can handle well-rounded, but Jeanty's the full package, and that doesn't come around often.
No, I mean it really doesn't. Chris, he was number 1 in yards after contact, number 1 in missed tackles forced, number 1 in carries over 15 yards. Obviously, we know he was, number 1, 2,500 yards and, 30 touchdowns on the ground. Is the gap that significant to you between Jeanty and your number 2?
I think so, Dan, just because you look at a guy that only has the talent that Adam alluded to and the skill set you're looking for in a 3-down back that we all value. That's what you ultimately want. But because he's going to have the draft capital to back that, that's probably one of the more givens. The rest of these guys, we don't really know where they're going to fall necessarily, what opportunities they're going to have. Jeanty's going to get a chance to be a 3-down back right off the bat. That's one of the things that we know will probably happen while other guys might be pigeonholed in an early down role or rotational back guy. But we know if somebody's going to try to spend the draft capital on this guy, you're not taking him off the field. So you add that, which gives him a little bit more of a leash. I look like Bijan Robinson, for example, who wasn't necessarily as dominant as we expected him to be his rookie year, but because you knew Atlanta had that draft capital, you weren't necessarily worried about having Bijan in Dynasty. He was still somebody that you had great value and wound up bouncing back as one of the top running backs you can have right now. I think Jeanty's similar in his skill set that even if he was to kind of have a bump in the road, so to speak, in a rookie year, because of his opportunity, because of the draft capital he spent on him, he's not going to be getting benched anytime soon. So he's a guy that I feel like his value, even down the road, still going to be there. So why move him now? I think right now you have a guy who could be one of the stud running backs in the game, and they're very different in different classes. There's good running backs and there's great. We know the difference, and I think that's where Jeanty has opportunity to kind of show you. And even if he doesn't, he still has draft capital down the road. I think that if you want to make those moves to kind of split up assets, you can still do that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree with you guys in the sense of like this is a great running back class, and it says something that Jeanty he is on another tier. I want to tear him down just a little bit, okay? Just a little, just try to play devil's advocate here for a little bit. So First of all, a lot of people comp him to LaDainian Thompson. I know, Chris, you have that comp as well. I personally hate that comp. The reason I hate that comp is because LaDainian Thompson, one, much bigger player. Ashton Jeanty's 5'8", 211. LaDainian Thompson was 5'10", 220. Okay, and then there was nothing he couldn't do. Jeanty, on the other hand, well, while I think he can do it, I'm not saying he can't, but I don't think he's going to be the CMC type, the Saquon Barkley type in the receiving game. Now, Boise State didn't throw it to him a ton. I'm not knocking him for not getting the volume necessarily. And in what I see on film, I have no reason to think he's not going to be able to be dependable as far as dump downs goes. But this isn't a guy who's going to be lining up or have the ability to line up in the slot or run receiver-like patterns. That's not really his game. My comp to him more is a Devonta Freeman. Now, having said that, before you guys all freak out, I do think he's better than Devonta Freeman. I think he's more durable than Devonta Freeman. I think he can handle a bigger workload than Freeman got the opportunity to do so when he was in the NFL. But I think he is a little bit more of a slasher with phenomenal contact balance. But I think there's some things we can knock him on. And he was 317th in PFF when it comes to pass protection grade. So he's got to have a little ways to go when it comes to that aspect of his games. Again, just looking to nitpick. I don't want to paint the picture this is the perfect prospect, but at the same time, his numbers of 2,500 yards, of 29 touchdowns, first in just about every category, and still at 33 targets. It wasn't like he had nothing. There is still a gap there. He's still a special player. He is the most likely running back, the only running back who's going to go in the top 10. Might even get drafted higher than Bijan did when he got drafted at 7. All those things are fantastic. I think, depending upon where you are, I think you can trade back for Omarion Hampton or a Tet McMillan or whatever the case may be, pick up an extra pick. And I don't think it's going to kill you if you do. But I do think this is a top 5 fantasy running back within the next 3 years at the same time. And I can't say that for the rest of this class. What do you guys think of that?
My one thing that I have to add to that is 2023 offers a really optimistic glance at what he could be as a receiver. I know 2024 wasn't anything crazy, but in 2023 he had a 99th percentile yards per route run on 48 targets. Like, this was, now again, to your point, not running crazy routes or anything, but you saw someone who could clearly handle being efficient as a receiver, not again running, out of the slot. Like, this isn't Alvin Kamara or, someone like that, a CMC to your example, but certainly someone who can handle being a part of your receiving game one way or another.
Like I said, I don't disagree. I know he can do it. I'm just not putting him on that pedestal of the completeness. Is all I'm saying.
Well, I think
that's playing devil's advocate. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm gonna say the difference, Dan, I think is for me is that no, he's not Marshall Faulk, but that's why I have the comp with LaDainian Tomlinson. LaDainian Tomlinson didn't profile as the guy who was lining up in a slot and a mismatch out of the backfield per se. What he could do is catch the angle route. He could catch a sweep. He could catch it out of the backfield. He didn't show a lot of that at TCU. But did you see that you saw the ability to make people miss? You saw the ability to kind of get in and out of his breaks. I think Jeanty shows you that he has the skill set, that he can do a lot of those things. I think the difference that you're talking about is, no, he's not going to be a guy who I'm going to use as a chess piece necessarily. But I think on the flip side, he's definitely a guy that could be a weapon in the screen game and the angle routes and different things. And I think that's where you saw, at Adam's point, you saw that very effectively utilized in Boise State.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so now we got to talk about who's your number 2. Who should your number 2 be? We got a showdown for you. All right, so let's get into our little boxing ring over here and adjust our cameras accordingly a little bit because this thing gets kind of wonky. But as we do that, listen, Adam has Omarion Hampton as his number 2. Chris has Kaleb Johnson as his number 2, which is a little bit of a different take than what we typically see. Omarion Hampton is the consensus number 2. So I want Chris to tell me first why Kaleb Johnson, not Omarion Hampton, should be the number 2 running back on your rookie boards.
Look, I like Omarion Hampton, and this definitely can change according to draft profile we talked about earlier. Where do they get drafted? Where their fits? But look at Kaleb Johnson as one of the guys in this running back class. Dan, you talked about you want a bell cow back. Kaleb Johnson to be a bell cow back, a guy that was highly efficient with 240 carries, only had about 120 yards less, I believe, than Hampton had, who had about 50 more carries. The touches out of the backfield, Kaleb Johnson, he didn't wow people with the 40, but I didn't expect him to. My comp for him is Larry Johnson, a guy who had 21 runs over 20 yards this past season. So the explosiveness is there, the big playability is there. But the biggest difference for me, where it kind of solidified where I'm a little bit more higher in Kaleb than Hampton, is one, I like Caleb's feet better and his vision. I think he's more patient as a runner. I think he does a better job of choosing the holes, where I think Hampton gets downhill and just kind of hits it. If it's there, it's great. If it's not there, oh well. And the other part of it is I think Kaleb Johnson's a better finisher. You look at the splits, come the fourth quarter, Kaleb Johnson was averaging almost 8.5 yards per carry. The second half in general, he got more dominant as the game progressed, while you didn't see that necessarily trend for Hampton. So the splits for me and ability to be that finisher, I look for guys, Dan, who can get double-digit touchdowns, as guys who can be separators in the running back position. I think Kaleb Johnson is that guy who can be a guy who's definitely going to be utilized in the red zone, but also a guy who can be finishing off games, and a guy who can be that bruiser. While I think Hampton can get rotated in and maybe has a little bit more of the speed element. I know the big plays might be a little more exciting, but like I said, Kaleb Johnson was no slouch. So I look at a guy that people kind of are down after the combine, but to me had one of the better footwork, one of the better backs built. And I think there's a lot of things going for Kaleb Johnson moving forward.
Okay. All right. So making a strong, compelling case. Adam, why is Omarion Hampton number 2?
Yeah, first and foremost, I want to say I would agree, and I would potentially go as far as to say that Kaleb Johnson, I think he might have the second best vision in this class. So from that perspective, I'm not going to disagree. But where, for me, I prefer Hampton, especially from a fantasy perspective, is I think it's a fairly decent chance that Kaleb Johnson gets typecasted as a 2-down back. He's someone who at times showed he could be an okay receiver. But to me, I never got wowed as a pass blocker. I think he was someone who was willing to, contact and be aggressive. And I think that there's, he can develop into a better pass blocker, but he wasn't someone who
wasn't great. I'm not going to say it's great.
No, I think he, again, could develop. It wasn't like he was unwilling to hit people in the backfield, but I don't think he could recognize pressure. I don't think he did a very good job of staying in front of people. And now, that's a problem. It is concerning for a guy to be at least my second back in this class, which has a bunch of great backs, to potentially be a 2-down back. Now, again, as a 2-down back, I think for him, Jeanty, him, and Martinez, we're going to get to later, I think are my favorite actual just 2-down runners in this class. Jeanty being the one that is actually a 3-down back, and that's why he's so special. But for me, Hampton is, we talked about Kaleb Johnson's athletic profile in the combine. I'm not knocking him necessarily for that, but what I will say is that Omarion Hampton's being as good as it was in a class where this is already super competitive at that running back position does, to me, push him ahead. Where you are, for your size, an elite athlete, and you are maybe not quite the runner, but very comparable, and you're better on third downs. Also not an elite pass protector by any means, but I do think he's better. And I definitely think he's the better receiver between the two. And he's someone who, look, Kaleb Johnson, I'm not going to say he didn't carry a massive workload or anything, but what was Hampton's 99th percentile his last season at North Carolina in terms of attempts over a season? We know he can be a full 3-down workhorse bell cow back and carry that workload and stay healthy and do the whole thing. So for me, he's someone who, if I was going to take a guy outside of Jeanty to be a full-on workhorse RB1 candidate moving forward in Dynasty or in Standard or in whatever, to me, Hampton's that guy with the best chance.
All right. So
well, Adam, real quick.
Go ahead, Chris. Okay. Rebuttal.
No, I was just going to ask. You talked about the profile you like for Hampton, but I look at Kaleb, and if you have the vision and you don't have necessarily the line that's going to be opening holes for you, to me, that's one of the key things that kind of separates your chance to be on the field and be that 3-down back or have a chance to be a 3-down back. Adam, I disagree with you that Hampton might be more than a 2-down back, but I think he has just as much opportunity to pigeonhole as that early down 2-down guy as well. And I didn't see him necessarily excel in a passing game where you can say he's better in passing attack. As a workhorse back, he had 40 more carries, like I said, than Kaleb Johnson did, but Kaleb Johnson was much more efficient. He had 240 carries, so he definitely handled the load. 21 touchdowns in an Iowa team that nobody was scared of at anything and down the field. So, and like I said, 21 plays over 20 yards, that's more than the guy who had the 4.4 40.
Okay. Adam, you want to add anything real quick?
No, I mean, look, again, as runners, I think that they're fairly comparable. I mean, they both have a season at the 92nd percentile in, PFF's elusive rating, for example. They're both, they grade out to me very similar as runners. So it's just those small edges that you find in athleticism and in the receiving game, which I'm not saying are massive differences, but it's enough in a class where, I mean, candidly, the difference between RB2 and RB12 is 30 spots in your big board. Like I like Kaleb Johnson. I think he's a second round back, but I mean, this is super competitive.
Well, to that point, that's why I talked about the splits. He's a finisher in my book, where you have questions whether or not Hampton is going to be that finisher. To me, Kaleb Johnson showed you the splits with almost 8.5 yards per carry on fourth quarter. And then I got dominant as the game progressed. The touches weren't hurting him, while you saw the efficiency for Hampton wasn't necessarily getting better, especially by that fourth quarter.
All right. So it's time for me to judge. Great points. I like both these running backs. They're both very, very good. Yeah. We do have to crown a winner. I'm going with Adam on this one. Now, part of this is too, Omarion Hampton's also my RB2. So you can call it a little bit biased, Chris. That's fine. You can appeal with the judges later. But what I will say to this point, and Adam, you didn't even use this argument, Omarion Hampton's the only other running back expected to go in the first round. Kaleb Johnson has been sliding down a little bit, where we're talking about late second round, and sometimes now he's getting more popular in the early third round, where he's sliding to that proficiency. Chris, here's also what I would say. There is now, and I want to say this to your point, though. Kaleb Johnson is a better, efficient receiver than I think people want to give him credit for. So I want to say that. But there is a tier drop as far as efficiency goes between Omarion Hampton and Kaleb Johnson. Omarion Hampton, I don't think a lot of people maybe even know this or realize this part, but he was 37th in yards per route run amongst the running back group. When you take in the fact of his size at 6'1", 224, then he runs a 4.46. Hampton, again, I comp him to Jonathan Taylor. He became that kind of a freak athlete through the combine, already had the production. And I would throw this out there, too. I think Iowa's offensive line and run scheme is much better than what Hampton had in North Carolina as well, which I think could lead to some of the efficiency. With Kaleb, he was excelled in zone, and that's what Iowa does. They run zone all day. So I'm not going to sit here and say Kaleb couldn't excel in a gap scheme. He didn't get the opportunity to do so. But we already know, based on Omarion Hampton snaps, that he's versatile and can excel in both zone and gap schemes. 41st in gap schemes, 15th in zone schemes or zone attempt schemes. So we have the versatility. We have the better efficient passer. We have similar yards after contact. To Adam's point, this is a very similar rushing group. I look at Omarion Hampton. I don't think he's getting pigeonholed, except if he winds up with Sean Payton on the Denver Broncos. But again, that's something we have to talk about after the draft capital goes. But I think for most teams, he would not get pigeonholed. I am a little bit worried about Kaleb getting pigeonholed because he doesn't have the gaudy pass numbers. And we've seen that even if guys can do it, we've seen it where if they don't have the gaudy pass numbers and you're a bigger back with a slower 40 time, you get pigeonholed before you maybe even really get a chance to show yourself. And that's one thing I do worry about with Kaleb Johnson. So I give the little edge here to Adam on that front. Now we do have another showdown, and I gotta mix these around here because now Chris has to be the judge. All right, so let's get Chris in the middle of the screen here, and then I'm taking on Adam because we got a Ohio State bake-off to do on this one here. So Quinshon, Judkins, TreVeyon, Henderson. I have Judkins at RB3. Adam has TreVeyon Henderson at RB3. Which Ohio State running back is it going to be? Adam, I'll defer to you first.
Yeah, so a few things. I think for one, TreVeyon Henderson, has just graded out super well as a runner the last couple of years. Now, look, he hasn't been quite the workhorse, especially in the last couple of years, that Judkins had been in the past in terms of just actual attempts. But he's been extremely efficient as a runner. This past year, we also saw TreVeyon Henderson be in the 81st percentile of yards per route run over the last 2 seasons, so 2024 and 2023, over a 2-season stretch. He's been a really good runner, really good tester. In terms of things that I really appreciated about him, I thought he was a better pass blocker than I would have expected for his size. Not to say he's great or anything, but I mean, I think he's better than Omarion Hampton as a pass blocker, which for a 225-pound back versus Henderson, like, that's impressive to me. He's someone who accelerates really well. I think his speed might even be a little bit overrated, but that acceleration and some of his movements, in the hips, makes it maybe appear that way. I think he's very evasive, and that shows. His avoided tackles per attempt was pretty solid, at least above average. It wasn't, incredible, but it was definitely really solid. And then Judkins was someone who, for me, look, I thought he was a very poor pass blocker. He is someone who early on showed really strong promise as a receiver, but these last 2 years was a little bit less efficient. He was a little bit better in terms of avoided tackles per attempt, and especially, look, he's someone who I have to give props. I was lower on Judkins, towards the beginning of the scouting process, but he did climb up my board through the playoffs. He was someone who was very, very impressive during that stretch. He was just someone who it didn't always feel like I was getting his A game. He wasn't extremely consistent. I mean, look, his A game is amongst the best in this class, and we have to talk about why it was so interesting when he transferred and why he was the recruit that he was. I just don't think that I always saw that. Again, the A game was there. It's just he wasn't always on his A game. So I prefer Henderson a little bit. I think he's someone who look. I think the floor is there, right? I think Judkins is someone who, if you don't get that workhorse role, there could be problems. Versus Henderson, say the worst case is he gets 13 attempts a game, he's still going to produce on that. And I don't know that you're consistently getting that from Judkins if he is one of these backs who, like we've talked about, look, this is a deep running back class. There's a possibility that 2 or 3 of these guys get stuck in the same room. And I think if that happens to Henderson, I'm still fine picking Henderson. If that happens to Judkins, I may be reconsidering things.
Well, and you know what? That's fair. When it comes to touches, Henderson is the type of guy who might not need as many touches to get his to be an RB2. But at the same time, he's not going to be the guy ever to get a workhorse role back, no matter what the situation is. We saw that in college. Even when he had the opportunity last year, he could have been the guy. But instead, Ohio State goes out and brings in, to your point, a highly touted recruit in Quinshon Judkins to pair up with him. TreVeyon Henderson's never had more than 179 total opportunities, never more than 156 carries. There is limitations that come with that when you're not getting a significant workload. Judkins, on the however, in Ole Miss, proved that he could handle a workload. He's the only running back besides Devin Neal in this class that has 3 years of plus 1,000-yard seasons, including this past year when he was splitting time with TreVeyon Henderson because he became more efficient during that split. So I don't think he's somebody who can't do it on less touches. Here's the other part, and I know Henderson is the more explosive visual runner, but Judkins proved that he's on the same level as far as a total athlete goes. When you have a 4.43 for Henderson or 4.48 for Judkins, he's not far off. Judkins actually had better explosive scores because he had a better broad jump and a better vertical, or same vertical jump, better broad jump for Judkins, that is. So he's just as explosive. He's also more physical. He's going to be the guy who closes out the game because you can lean on him. He has great vision in between the tackles. And he's a finisher. This guy has 45 touchdowns over 3 years, 16, 15, and 14. He's the type of guy I want closing out my game. He's the type of guy I want at the goal line. And he's an underrated pass receiver producer. Like, TreVeyon Henderson had a little bit better, 1.1 1.4 yards per route run. Well, Judkins had 1.13. And he's got better hips than I think people give him credit for, too. So I had him comped to Orion Matthews, where, yes, you are definitely going to get your work on first and second down, but you are good enough to handle a 3-down workload. You're good enough to be involved in the passing game, good enough to get, let's say, maybe 3 or 4 targets in a game. And if you're getting the main work and you're a closer and you're a touchdown scorer, well, then I like your upside more. You have more opportunity to be the guy, to be the bell cow than I think TreVeyon Henderson does, where I have him comp more to a Tevin Coleman. And Tevin Coleman was a great RB2, and he didn't need as many touches. He was paired up with Devonta Freeman to be that RB2, but he could never crack the top 12 because he never got the ball quite enough, never got the ball enough in the goal line, never got the ball enough to close out games. So that's why I edged out with Quinshon Judkins. Both are pretty phenomenal backs. I both have them in my top 6. But Chris, it is now for your time.
You guys both make really compelling arguments. I look at it as a situation where I am a little biased in my rankings. I do have TreVeyon Henderson higher than Jenkins. Dan, I like your argument that Quinn Jenkins could be the bell cow of the two. I definitely think that if you're evaluating which of the two are going to be the bell cow opportunity, I think that you win that argument. But I'm going to go with Adam because I think that when it comes down to a skill set that's not as found throughout this deep draft, I think TreVeyon Henderson is going to be utilized in the passing attack. I think that's where guys kind of visualize him. While he might never be that, he has a role where he's going to easily be a rotational guy and get the opportunities to get the high yardage in a sense, where he gets the 4 to 5 yards per carry. He gets the opportunity to catch the ball out of the backfield. He gets to build more explosive. I think Jenkins can maybe beat that with the touchdowns. I just think there's so many other guys in this draft that are similar skill sets, bigger guys, and it's really hard to just be a finisher. I think that he can catch the ball. I'm with you on that. But where I think to me, the difference is TreVeyon can beat you on the option route out of the backfield. I don't think Jenkins can consistently. I don't think he can beat linebackers consistently on enough bases to be involved in that passing attack in the backfield. So I'm going to lean with Adam just because I think Henderson brings more immediately to the picture, and I think easier for coaches to scheme up for initially.
And I appeal to the judge after the show.